Hello there, humans, bees, earthlings, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you're lucky enough to be doing it to. I'm Bushka on Blitz. Welcome back to channel, you happening things, you happening humans, you crazy little tanking machines of justice and innuendo. That's me, the big kahuna of Australian tanking rock and roll, and I'm here today to give you a glimpse into the WZ-113, the Chinese heavy tank. I don't call this a super heavy. It's taken me a long time to get to grips with this tank, and I actually think it's more of a kind of support side / frontline heavy. It's an odd tank, and I wasn't really that successful in driving it until recently. And it's got a few issues, and it's quite odd because they don't. You wouldn't think that they're the same issues when you look at the armor profile on paper and you look at the way the tank is set up. You wouldn't think that the issues that it has are the ones you'd be expecting. That doesn't make any sense at all. But the issues are a surprise. Let's go with that instead of trying to wax eloquent. If you're just wondering what I've been doing of late, I just got back from New York and it put a little bit of a dampener on tanking videos. We're out now and we've done just about all the new Chinese heavy tanks. We're still got to do the IS-2 and then we're going to go and do the E3 and we're going to do a Tech 3 stream on Monday. So stick around the channel. There's always lots of action happening and there's lots of things going on. The WZ-113 has the kind of firepower that you get out of the FV-215B, and that tank has an amazing capacity for just blowing stuff the hell up. You have the highest DPM of any tier 10 heavy tank, 3,275, exactly the same as 215B, and you have a bizarre 122mm gun, which is a step down from the 130mm gun you get on the tier 9. But it's not really a step down at all. It's a big step up in terms of power, because if you've ever faced a 215B and you've had to deal with that absolute nightmare of DPM as a medium tank, you'd know that it's tough to deal with. And you can see this tank also has a very good armor profile. I'm bouncing a lot of shots, so therefore, if it's got that kind of firepower and that kind of armor profile, it must be OP. Aha. This is where things go a little bit weird. This tank does have a great armor profile, as long as they don't shoot anywhere else apart from your upper glacis. Because your upper glacis is borderline OP. You get, I think it's 315 millimeters of armor frontally on your upper glacis. It's like IS-4 style. But if you saw me get hit there, you'd realize there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, because that looked like it hit pretty close to my upper glacis. And the reason is that the side armor on this tank is tremendously thin. It actually it relies on auto bounce angles because it's quite steeply angled. It's only a 120mm flat part on the side armor, and then you have a angled 90mm of thickness like area just below the chassis of the tank, below the turret of the tank. 90mm isn't a lot, unless you have a perfect angle. People go through that very, very easily. And that makes it tough when you don't have great traverse. I mean, your traverse is reasonably good, but if someone can get to even slightly to the side of you, they'll get a really, really easy shot in. So that does a lot of negating on the super heavy aspect of the tank, because you'd expect a tank with over 300mm of frontal armor unangled to be able to hold a line like an absolute boss, and it can't do that because quite simply there's too many mobile tanks at tier 10, except in perfect situations. You can see here this is a very, very good position for a tank like the WZ-113. And the reason I'm showing you a video of this game is because it highlights just how strong the tank is when you can keep people in front of you, and how your ability to bounce shots with this really strong turret and really strong upper glacis is incredible. But watch what happens as soon as people get to the side of you. You are absolutely screwed. Unlike, say, an IS-7 or an IS-4, where the thickness and the weight of your armor, or a mouse, or even an E100 to a degree, the thickness and the weight of the armor actually is quite tremendous. Your armor is all about angles. It's not about thickness. It's a very lucky bounce, by the way. And because of that, you are absolutely screwed if someone gets to the side of this tank. But again, I've put it back into a position where people can't see the sides. And to be fair, there are not many tanks in the game who could deal with this situation and actually deal with it effectively. And it's no shame on the WZ-113 that when there are 3 tanks plus a T110E3 trying to kill you from the sides and the rear, you're going to get wrecked. But I really like the balance. I really like the nuance because you have a great gun. It's 8.19 rounds a minute, okay? It's 0.317 dispersion. That means you get a reload every 7.3 seconds. And that's it's pretty funky because this 121B here and me have about the same hit point pool. No joke. I have about the same hit point pool, 200 hit points difference. Not much, but it's a fair chunk, I guess, at T10. It's half a 120mm shell. But we also have about the same DPM. He's got slightly more DPM than I do. And I've got a hell of a lot more armor. Like, this thing has some legit armor in this position. And I'm in a good position. I've finally figured this out. You can want it to be a heavy frontline tank that can go up and side scrape and move around, but it just quite simply isn't. You've got to go to the parts of the map where this tank can be successful. And the reason I say that is because if you expose your lower glacis, it has 140mm of armor. You can't angle it far enough to actually get any kind of protection on it or angle that it's going to bounce shots. So you look for positions like this. And the reason these positions can sometimes be tough to take and you don't want to see people take them is because you've got like 6 degrees of gun depression. And that means that, well, it can be hard to be a gun depression tank hiding that lower glacis when you don't really have any gun depression. And what you want to do is get that upper glacis into their face and do great big nasty chunks of damage. But that isn't always available. It's not always on the board. It's not something that you just want to go out and try and do at the start of the game. And I actually found that the longer the game went, the better this tank became. Because if you can conserve your hit points in this tank, you have enough DPM to smash, absolutely smash, pretty much anyone that will come across your radar. And if you can land HE shells, and that's quite possible with a .317 dispersion gun that has 68mm of HE pen on tanks like a Leo 1, you can do big numbers. You just have to be a lot more careful with it than you realised. And you see all the games where I'm being successful here are games where I am kind of just not overextending, not putting myself in bad situations, not being too aggressive. I can't counsel this enough. Do not treat this like an IS-4. Do not treat it like an IS-7. Look at my upper glacis. Look at the angle on it. It's incredibly steep. There is no way anything is panning through that. But at the same time, look at my gun. Its gun depression is not amazing. You've got to really work the angles and be very, very careful. It's a lot like driving a Russian medium. You have to use that upper glacis like a shield, move it around and about, yet it's got that DPM of a 215B. I think it's a tank that if you get good at it, is going to be absolutely monstrous. But it's going to take some work because there's not a lot at tier 10 that feels like a 113. And I understand how a lot of people who are very, very good at this game find it to be a bit of a punish because it's not really like any other tank at tier 10. It has characteristics like the DPM of the 215B and the upper glacis, say, of an IS-7. It's got that kind of strength. But it doesn't have the spaced armor on the side like so many tanks at tier 10 do. Its traverse numbers are bad. 26.73 degrees of traverse and 20.65 degrees of turret traverse. So that accentuates the negativity of that bad, bad, bad side armor. And you can see if you go round a corner with your side armor first, hey, you're going to get spanked. And so you have to pull your head in, you have to pull yourself back, and you just have to start working the numbers and being patient again and waiting for your opportunities. Because if you don't wait for your opportunities, if you try and create the opportunities, it's just too unwieldy and too awkward to be successful at that unless you're incredibly lucky or your enemy's incredibly bad. And if they're bad, well, any tank will be able to do that anyway, so it's nothing special. The other thing that stands out for the WZ-113 is the speed. It gets out to 50 Ks, which is just absolutely frog in a sock, flying. And it gets there pretty bloody quick. 50 kilometers an hour is nothing to scoff at. It's a top-notch speed, AMX 50B style. You don't get there quite as quick as the 50B, but you do get there. And that can lead you to some pretty interesting situations where you can go to areas where the mediums are and support your mediums really, really well. And this is not a tank that a medium tank wants to see, because unlike an IS-7, which can get out there and quite often be an assault breakthrough tank and get to those big numbers very, very comfortably, this tank can get there and bring a very accurate gun and massive DPM to the fight as well. So when you roll up on a medium tank, you have nearly as much damage per minute as they do. You have a gun that's not really going to miss. You have massive pen, 255 millimeters of pen on your APCR, and your heat is 335, which is great pen. And you bring all that to the table. I mean, that's an IS-7. You go to heat, no problems, straight through the front, absolutely no problems. And a lot like an IS-4, if you run this thing with calibrated shells, you drop a little bit of DPM, right? You will drop the DPM on this thing if you run it with calibrated shells down to 3046, which is still more than a Leopard PTA. And that gives you the ability to pen at, when you're using heat, pen at 370 millimeters. 370 millimeters of pen at tier 10 is a whole hell of a lot, and it will let you get straight through a whole lot of things. And it means that when guys like Mouses and IS-4s and the like angle to you, you're very comfortable in that situation, because you can still pen them quite comfortably. 370 is the kind of pen that makes a mouse driver very, very edgy. When they pull out and they start doing their whole wiggle and jiggle and turning the turret thing, most tanks who are heavy tanks who are trying to hit point trade with them just can't. They can't make that trade because they're such poor penetration heavy tanks, and they don't have the accuracy. 0.317 dispersion and 370 millimeters of heat pen will make a mouse driver go very, very quiet in the corner, especially when you can do it at 3000 damage per minute. And unless you're exposing your lower glacis, that mouse driver will not have much luck in actually doing much back to you. And I'm not saying it's a better tank than a mouse in any way, shape or form, because I think the mouse is incredibly strong at the moment. Look at that straight through. Like, that's a flat spot. That's a really good penning tank. And this is running it without the calibrated shells. I mean, you can see it still does pretty well. Overall, I think it's a great tank. I think it's a tank that, and you can see why I moved right next to this E50. You're very low slung, so that means they have struggles getting the gun down to you. Your hatches can be penned, but there's still, even your weak points, your hatches are like 240 millimeters of penetration required. The only big problem you have is that lower glacis. You've got to learn to hide it. And that means maybe you take a little bit of extra time at the start and don't push forward like a lunatic, even though you can go 50 kilometers an hour. Don't overextend. I mean, it should be second nature to most people in tanking these days, but if you overextend in this tank, you will really be punished. Like, there is very, very little likelihood of you not being punished. And that's fair enough, because there are lots of areas on this tank that can be penned, around the gun mantlet as well. The hatches, the lower glacis, the sides. Sounds like a lot. But you've got to use your upper plate. You've got to find ways to put that upper plate into the game. And if it looks like you're going to have issues with medium tanks, if they're going to push on you, then make sure you've got some rocks or the debris of other tanks around, because this is very frustrating, this tank, when put into a turn fight. It doesn't do particularly well in turn fights because, well, let's be honest, it's a big ass heavy tank with under 30 degrees of traverse. And you can see I'll quite often start turning my tank and my turret at the same time to get to a target, instead of just letting the turret do the turning, because it just doesn't have enough turret traverse. But look, I really enjoy driving the tank. It's different, it's fun, and I think for a top tier heavy, that's important. It's got to be different. You've already got so many good heavy tanks in the game. Why waste your time grinding up a line if it's going to be exactly like all the others? So hats off, Wargaming. I think you nailed it. Love your work, boys and girls. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate the support. Look after yourselves and stay safe on the battlefield.